The use of different standards at the upper end of the spectrum of academic achievement is something that should be avoided. I think that the people who embrace it are either lazy or racist. Those are very strong words. Lazy in the sense that they don't want to face up to the actual challenge, which is how do you educate the youngsters at the earlier stages of their development such that they're competitive, or racist in the sense that they tacitly concede that the blacks are never going to be able to perform as a population in a comparable way, and therefore they must corrupt the standards of judgment of the institutions of outstanding academic achievement in order to get a demographic result. And I'm against that.
Welcome to Conversations with me, Peter Boghossian. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome author, economist, esteemed public intellectual, and all-around terrific human being, Glenn Loury. Glenn is the Merton P. Stoltz Professor of the Social Sciences and Professor of Economics at Brown University, and the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Carnegie Scholarship. At the age of 33, he became the first African-American tenured professor of economics at Harvard. He's also a fellow at the Hoover Institute. His publications are numerous, and they include, among others, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality, Race, Incarceration, and American Values, One by One from the Inside Out, and Ethnicity, Social Mobility, and Public Policy. He has a podcast on YouTube and a Substack called The Glenn Show, which I highly recommend, and his new memoir is coming out next year. We had a very candid and raw conversation about race, racism, merit, and advice for his grandchildren. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Glenn Loury, it is a pleasure to have you here in conversation. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to show you some clips of some videos and get your opinion on those videos. So Reed and I go around the world. We're going to show you clips. I don't even know where the clips are from, but we've just come back from London, Australia, Puerto Rico, Hungary, Romania, everywhere. We're just going around the world making videos. And we're asking people on the street what they think about things. And I want to get your opinion because I listen to your podcast. I listen to the stuff you do with John, and I read your stuff. And I want to see what you think about these responses.
Okay.
All right, Reed, we're good to go. We are going to do, this is a good time to record. The U.S. is systemically racist, but before I do that, how do you define systemically racist?
White privilege.
A system that is designed for a specific race or ethnicity to fail in life.
The U.S. is designed to privilege white people. 3, 2, 1, move. Okay. Yeah, so in that video, they moved to strongly agree. What do you think of that? Was the U.S. What do you think of that?
I think that's the flavor of the month, or maybe of the decade. I don't know, since 2020, maybe since Michael Brown, maybe since Trayvon Martin. I think that's what they're saying. I don't think it has much connection with reality. I think it's a narrative. I could try to rebut it. I want to know what people are talking about when they say systemically racist. I think the fact of disparity is not necessarily evidence of racism. And I think there's a blame game going on. There's a kind of political thing that's going on where the minority group says systemic racism and where the guilt-ridden progressives say, oh yeah, let's make it better. I think that narrative is, or at least it can be, very disempowering. After all, if the system is flawed, if that's what's going on, they won't let you, they've got their knee on your neck, then there's not much scope for agency. There's not much ability to determine your own fate. So I'm not much given myself, though I am an African-American, to invoking the systemic racism narrative. I think as an objective matter, the United States is an open society. I think the fact that scores of millions of immigrants have come and made their lives since 1970 from ports of origin other than Europe, right here in the United States of America, is ample evidence to the contrary of the systemic racism narrative. I think African Americans are, in comparison to other populations of African descent scattered around the globe, wealthy, prosperous, powerful. So I'm actually a little bit befuddled by how much influence the systemic racism narrative has exerted. I think if I were one of these privileged white people who was being regaled with the extent of my privilege, I'd have more than a few choice words for the people who attempted to make me feel guilty for the fact that they might not have managed to make the best of their opportunities, such as they are.
You know, when I read Ibram X. Kendi, and less so Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I've thought about this probably more than any sane person should. Every disparity in outcome, this is one of his central claims, every disparity in outcome must be due to a system. And I was talking to, Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute.
Of course.
Yeah, so I had her on the show and I was talking to her about that. And I don't understand how that could even be possible. I don't understand how. Wouldn't that mean that culture played this literally no part in it at all?
They're going to say that the culture that you're talking about is itself a product of the system. They're going to say that exclusion, marginalization, segregation, discrimination have impacted adversely. And it's not entirely crazy to think, for example, that my friend Orlando Patterson, the sociologist, has made this argument about slavery and its impact on family relations, and he calls natal alienation, where the within family bonds across generations are interrupted because the master can sell the children off or has sexual access to the mother or whatever. And that you couldn't have had a system of labor exploitation such as chattel slavery without it having left a legacy of sociological damage, and so on. So that's what they're going to say. They're going to say the way that the war on drugs played out encouraged,
Sentencing.
Yeah, the policing and the revolving door of jails and prisons and whatnot. But again, I think that argument, everything is a determined consequence of a distorted historical influence of a system that was rooted in anti-Black racism, is both objectively inaccurate, but also is spiritually deadening. I mean, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. And there's absolutely a lot that we can do.
I want to come back to the idea that there's a lot we can do. I heard you say something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I thought it was incredibly profound. I think it was on Peterson's podcast. You said that even if every single conviction, and if I got this wrong, please let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Even if every single conviction of an African American man were justified, you cannot have a system that locks up so many people, particularly of a certain race. And I've been thinking about that for a long time. And that occurs that, and I'm no sociologist, I'm no expert in these things, but it seems just in terms of social coherence and role models and the way society functions, that's absolutely true. Like you just cannot lock up or have 1/3 of the population under the supervision of the criminal justice system at some extent, even if those convictions are true. I just have no idea what to do about it. I mean, one of the suggestions that people have made, and again, I'm coming back to Kendi because he's the Uber bestseller, endowed department chair, etc. Kendi, and he's also the most well-known. And he's more gravitas than someone like D'Angelo. Is equity as a solution, as opposed to equality. Like I almost never hear anybody talking about, oh, let's fix the schools, give everybody a public education in the first rate, give everybody health care till 18 or 21, independent of race or zip code or what have you. I almost never hear anybody talk about that. I hear people talk about solutions that take into account historical oppression variables. And so there are two things in this. One, I have no idea what to do about this other than an equality-based solution. And two, what do you think about the difference between an equality-based solution and an equity-based solution? And this is a big question. And do you see that having any bearing, for example, on incarceration rates?
Let me clarify what I said that you were mentioning initially. And this goes back to these lectures I gave at Stanford in 2007, which was a while ago now. And a small book was published by MIT Press afterwards called Race, Incarceration, and American Values in 2008. And what I said was you could have a million cases, each one rightly decided on its merits. And still, the cumulative consequence of having so decided could be a historic injustice. Yeah. And what I meant was that the cases, each one of them, a lawbreaker, he's brought before a jury of her peers and evaluated and sentenced, is about individual responsibility. It's about the responsibility of the criminal. But that doesn't exhaust the questions of responsibility. There's also social responsibility to undertake an effort that addresses the conditions underlying the criminal offense. And it's not crazy to say, if I have a war on drugs, I pass the law that makes it illegal to traffic in certain substances. And I have a complicated social network in which that law is being implemented so that there are people who use drugs. Not all of them are low-income ghetto residents, racial minorities. Many of them are middle-class, professional, whatever. It's a complicated market. But who will be the people engaged in street-level trafficking and the illicit substances? Who will be the foot soldiers in the black market? The black market, which is supported by a nationwide hedonistic pursuit of whatever diversion the drugs provide. But the foot soldiers being the people who are attracted to that line of work because their alternatives are relatively limited. It's going to be uneducated. It's going to be relatively young, male, minority, urban dwelling population. So now I end up with a large number of people drawn into this law enforcement matrix and who are being punished. And I'm seeing the disparity by class and by race and the incidence of the punishment. But I'm not asking myself whether or not the larger system in which these wrongful, illegal acts are taking place is amenable to modification or reform. For example, I might weigh in the balance the fact that if I make this traffic illegal, the consequences of doing so is to criminalize a certain marginal class of people. Right. And when I'm talking with my students about this, I often use the example of prostitution, street prostitution, where the street walker, the woman who's out there selling her body, a desperate, marginal, disadvantaged person, is being held accountable for their wrongful act. But the larger environment, which creates the marketplace for sexual services and the demand side of that market, are relatively unscathed in terms of the punitive consequences of trying to stamp this out. And the person might say, well, we're punishing the hookers, but we're not punishing the Johns. And they wouldn't be wrong in observing that there's an issue there. So that's meant to be an example of the general point that there's social responsibility, even when I'm talking about individuals who are breaking the law. Now, what to do about it? That's the question. Anything I say here is going to be a platitude. I mean, root causes, good luck with that. Restore the family, get some fathers in the home. I'm not sure exactly how to do that either. I do think, though, that whatever we would do about it in terms of social policy, in terms of education, in terms of vocational education, in terms of whatever mental health services that we might be providing to people, whatever supplement to the educational service delivery mechanism that we might want to make, isn't racial. It wouldn't be done in the interest of racial justice or racial equality. It would be done on behalf of the project of creating a decent society and meeting our social obligations to one another as citizens of a common political enterprise. So
I don't know how that would be accomplished. As central banks in countries like China, India, and Australia began transitioning to a digital currency, the Federal Reserve has been contemplating the same for the US. With a digital currency, the government could track every single purchase you make. Officials could even prohibit you from purchasing certain products or even easily freeze or seize all or part of your money. These are some of the reasons concerned Americans reached out to Birch Gold Group. They want to have a physical asset that's independent from the US dollar. Gold, held tax sheltered in a retirement account. Learn if gold is right for you too. Text Peter to 989-898 and they'll send you a free info kit on gold. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, countless 5-star reviews, Birch Gold has been helping my listeners from the very beginning. Text Peter to 989-898, 989-898, and claim your free info kit on gold, because if a central bank digital currency becomes reality, it'll be nice to have some gold to depend upon. I've been looking at the literature from a friend of mine just wrote a book, The Gift of Violence, and one of the things that he talks about in that book, Matt Thornton is his name, is very profound to me. I've heard him speak about this, is the importance of an adult male in the home. And so I think a lot of times people will look at a data set and see minority when the variable is lack of an adult male in the home, because that norms out even with across races. If there's not an adult male in the home, then that's a criminogenic factor. Those children in that household, and then the other thing about that is if one of those, I can't remember the exact statistic. This was a while ago, but if one of those parents is in prison, the likelihood that that kid will be incarcerated, I think is 6 or 7 times, and then 2 parents, it goes up even more. So it would seem like how you do it, again, I have no idea, but maybe that would be an ideal, or maybe that would be, I don't know. I really don't know.
not all problems have ready solutions, you know? I mean, what do? We talk about social maladies, and we not assume a certain amount of omnipotence and thinking that, oh, it's just a matter of finding the right policy?
That terrifies me.
This is one of the arguments, as I understand them, that conservatives make about the modesty in our objectives of reform, and that we might end up doing more harm than good by imposing the various solutions that people come up with in their armchairs, and then in an effort to pursue what Thomas Sowell calls cosmic justice. You know, we think we're going to make the world a better place, that everything is infinitely malleable. I agree about the important deleterious consequences of father absence on child development, and especially for the boys, you know, to learning restraint and self-discipline and whatnot. But I think it is it's certainly beyond my pay grade to prescribe, you know, how are we going to get fathers back in the home? I mean, we can talk about it, but if you look at the trends over the last half century, the out-of-wedlock birth rate for all demographic groups has risen very substantially.
And marriage too, right? So marriage is now a upper middle class value, and more people are having kids out of wedlock.
Yeah, that's something like 25 or 30% among whites, 65, 70% among blacks, babies born to mothers who are not married. And, you know, the thing is, there's a lot of cultural trends that are going on here. This is not my area of expertise, but I can just say that the sexual revolution, the pill, the feminism, you know.
The welfare state?
Yeah, of course. You would want to take the economic incentive factors into account, and I think the evidence is pretty strong that the net effect of transfers to indigent families has been to make marriage a relatively less attractive option, since you've got income supports.
Does it weigh on you to think about this stuff a lot?
I'm getting tired of it, if that's what you mean. Yeah.
It seems like it sits very heavy with you.
Yeah. The hour is late. I mean, it's we've been at this for a while, especially on the racial inequality front, and I kind of want to say, man up and woman up. I mean, this is not like I say, it's not a policy agenda. This is more like an existential, live in good faith kind of thing. Take care of your kids, pick the trash up in front of your house, get busy, stop with this walking around with your hand out. I know how this sounds. I mean, it sounds very harsh. I want to condemn the wanton criminality and violence and despicable behavior that I see in Chicago and Baltimore and St. Louis and Cleveland and Oakland and whatnot. I get tired of the excuse making. Oh, well, but they didn't this and they didn't that. The Kendi-esque arguments don't move me. I actually shudder at how widely embraced those arguments are. Equity or equality, either you're an anti-racist or you're a racist. If there's a disparity, it has to be because of racism. Otherwise, you're assuming that Black people are inferior. These are infantile in my mind. I mean, these are not serious arguments. These are performances. These are incantations of magical slogans. They're not serious. So yeah, life is short.
I know. And the older we get, the more acutely I realize
Indeed.
that.
We're counting down here. I'm in my last quarter of life,
Yeah.
with all likelihood.
I hope I have a quarter left.
Well, I hope so too.
Yeah, well, thanks. And the other thing about that is that, well, I'll put it on myself. It used to wear down on me, much less so now, but I see some of the things that people call you online, and I see like some of the criticisms that you get, and I'm thinking like, that's just completely insane. Like, that's not even, there's like no there. And, I mean, how do you deal with that? Or you just not even pay any attention to it?
Well, I can't miss it because I have to look at the comments that come in on my podcast and my Substack and at YouTube and so on. As a matter of managing this little small activity that I'm doing and trying to figure out who are listening and what they're thinking and so on.
Yeah.
But they're basically telling me to shut up. They're saying because I'm willing to speak whatever the truth is that I think I've been given to know, and I'm not infallible, so I could be saying stuff that is arguable or that's refutable. And because I'm Black, and because I'm professionally successful, and because I'm living a comfortable life, that I'm somehow a traitor, that I'm a grifter. These people, most of them, couldn't even begin to understand the intellectual journey and the professional accomplishments and the mastery over the canon in my field that I've accumulated over a half century of intellectual labor. I harbor thinly veiled contempt for this kind of bullying where they think that calling me a name is a substitute for an argument, or they attempt to shame me into silence when I express my reaction to the realities that are consuming a not insubstantial part of the African American population about whom I care just as deeply as anybody else walking around. It pisses me off, to be honest with you. If I had more time, I'd spend more time vituperating about it. But as it is, I shrug.
Do you have any outlets to blow steam off?
I go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week. I'm trying to stay alive. I'm a little bit overweight, maybe even more than a little bit. My back is killing me.
Well, how old are you now?
I'm 74. I'll be 75 in a couple of months. So, I have my lovely wife, Lawan, who we married in 2017, so that'll be 6 years in October.
Congratulations.
My former wife of 30 years died of breast cancer in 2011.
All right.
Yeah. So there's more to life than the culture wars and the political
Did you have any animals?
No, we don't have any pets. I don't have anything against them. We had a wonderful black lab, McCoy, who was present at my late wife Linda's um, deathbed. And, she loved that dog, and he loved her. And our two sons, Glenn the second and Nehemiah. So we kept a pet, but since she's died, I haven't, and since McCoy passed on, I haven't replaced him. But I enjoy playing chess. I get out and ride my bike. I listen to jazz music, amongst other things.
We should play some chess sometime.
Why not?
Yeah. Does your wife support what you do?
She doesn't agree with my politics. She does support what I do. She's, in fact, kind of a business manager for the Glenn Loury Substack enterprise. She pays the bills and keeps the records and whatnot. And she knows about my passions and my concerns, and she sympathizes with and supports me as a person who pursues them. But she's a progressive left of center. Bernie Sanders, actually, Bernie has let her down. She was a Bernie Sanders, Bernie bro, or Bernie sister, or whatever. But when he capitulated to the do-nothing Democrats, this is how she would put it. She has written him off. She listens to all these characters like Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore and and whatnot. And we
do you argue about that stuff? Do you fight about politics? Do you argue about that stuff?
Yeah, we argue about it.
But it's kind of good though that you argue about it and instead of her being resentful or her being just pissed off.
It's better out in the open. Yeah. And the arguments sometimes become heated, and we've had to be careful not to do damage to our relationship because of these political disagreements. And sometimes we have to call time out. We have to change the subject. We have to go to a different room or whatever and cool off.
Oh, so she's super passionate about these things then.
She's very passionate about them.
What do you love about her? What is it about her that attracts her to you?
She's a wonderful person. She's vivacious. She's resourceful. She's tenacious. She's very sociable.
I saw that when we were at that thing.
She makes friends instantly.
Yeah.
She is a magician in the kitchen.
What does she cook?
She cooks everything. She's an adventurer. I mean, she's got dozens of cookbooks and stuff like that, but she improvises and whatnot. She's very careful about what we put into our bodies, about the food that we eat.
That's good.
She's 17 years my junior, and she's got a kind of vitality that I resonate with.
Were your kids? That must have been hard. So it was your second marriage?
Yeah, I've been married 3 times. I have 5 children and 6 grandchildren. My oldest 2 are a product of my first marriage, and I was 18 years old when my oldest child was born. The mother and I married shortly thereafter, and when my first wife, we had a second child together, Lisa and Tamara, who are in their 50s now.
Do you see your grandchildren much?
Not as much as I would like. Not very much at all. Every summer, and we're going to do it again in a few weeks, we get together. I rent a big house in North Carolina, Outer Banks, on the beach, and we have a tradition now. It's been going on for a decade of a kind of family reunion. All the children, their partners, and the grandchildren will come and get together. We'll pile into one of these mansions and spend a week on the beach, interacting with one another and whatnot.
What do you think it's important that your grandchildren know? Not about you, but about life.
That they can make their own fate and it's up to them, that the ball is in their court, that the world is their oyster, that they are amongst the most privileged people ever to have walked on the planet. That living in good faith, dignity, self-honesty is vitally important, that respect, honor, and the good opinion of your fellows is worth seeking and is not something that anybody can give you or do for you. It's something that you have to earn for yourself. That the possibilities are unlimited here in this great country that we are here in the United States, fortunate enough to be citizens of. That the spiritual questions are profoundly important and a long way from being self-evident. We could talk about religion. I'm not especially religious in terms of denominational commitment or whatever, but I think the meaning of life is worth pondering and is not trivial. Something like that.
Would there be meaning in your life absent to God?
Yeah.
What gives
I'm not at all certain about the existence of God.
What do you derive meaning in your life?
I'm going to say work. I'm going to say family, self-command. I'm a recovering drug addict. I'm a recovering born-again Christian. I think there's more going on in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in my given philosophy. So I'm on a quest. I want to grow. I want to learn.
What do you want to learn about?
I want to learn about how people deal with the problems of life. I'll tell you a book that I'm reading right now. It's called A Certain Ambiguity. It's by two Indian mathematicians. It's a novel. I don't remember their names, to be honest with you, but the book wouldn't be hard to find. A Certain Ambiguity. And the question of the book is there anything that we can know for certain?
Yeah.
And the narrative pits an atheist South Asian mathematician against a Christian, decent, fair-minded establishment figure in turn of the 20th century New Jersey. The Indian mathematician happens to be visiting in the United States. He says publicly that he doesn't believe in this Jesus stuff. And the local townspeople take offense and they have him arrested for blasphemy. And the decent, believing Christian judge who is charged with adjudicating his case enters into a dialogue with him. And the whole book is about this dialogue. Should he be punished for blasphemy because he's offended the townspeople by declaring that this Jesus stuff is bunk? His reasons for declaring that Jesus stuff is bunk is that there's no proof. There's no logic to it. It's just pure faith. I mean, he doesn't believe in what he can't demonstrate. And he makes his case by going to Euclid, the geometer, the Greek geometer, and saying, here's how you demonstrate stuff for sure. You start with axioms and you deduce. Now, the Christian decent burgher, the judge, wants to have as an axiom that there is nothing without a cause. No thing exists without it having been caused. And from that, he's going to deduce the existence of God. And therein lies the argument between the Indian mathematician and the judge. Along the way, some of the great accomplishments of mathematics, Georg Cantor's dealing with the paradoxes of the infinite, for example, are exposited. And the reader of the book is transported, or I am transported. I'm transported in time back to a pre-World War I, or just immediately post-World War I America. I am invited into an intellectual disputation that is rich and deep and resonant. And I'm taken out of my own place and time, and I'm elevated. I'm edified. Edification, I guess, is what I'm really looking for. My spirit is enhanced. These are big ideas. These are profound reflections that are illustrated in this little novel that I'm talking about. This is not, Dostoevsky or something, but it's. I love the playfulness, the inventiveness, the creativity, and I can sit and I can read this novel. This is just the one that I happen to be reading right now. I mean, I like reading novels amongst other things. I like learning another recent nonfiction work that I've encountered, and I'm answering you. You asked me in effect, what do I find meaningful in life? And
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, reading books I find meaningful, and taking myself out of my time and place and out of my immediate concerns, and absorbing ways of thinking that I would not have ever come to on my own.
What was the nonfiction book?
A Certain Ambiguity. I was going to mention another book, Reza Aslan, author of this biography of Jesus, right, that was very widely read some years ago, called Zealot. Has a nonfiction book about an American missionary, a student of Woodrow Wilson's at Princeton, a man called Howard Baskerville. He's a Presbyterian missionary who goes to Persia in 1907 and takes up residence there at a mission, teaching Mohammedans, the Muslim residents of Tabriz in Persia in 1907, on the eve of a revolution in what is now Iran, in which the people demand from the Shah, who's a hereditary monarch, a constitutional assembly, a parliament, a voice in the governance of the country. And the Shah resists, and violence breaks out, and there's a revolution, and Howard Baskerville gets caught up in it. Anyway, to make a long story short, Aslan, in this biography of Howard Baskerville, teaches me about the constitutional upheaval in Iran before the First World War, in a country that I knew nothing about, a culture that I knew absolutely nothing about the mentality of a person who would travel from, I think he's from, Baskerville is originally from like North Dakota or Montana or something like that. He comes to the East Coast. He's a Christian, a Presbyterian believer. He's at Princeton, and he's imbibing the spirit of the time there, and he gets absorbed in this mission work. This is so far from my day-to-day life. I mean, I'm elevated by just taking all of this on.
I love that word, elevated. So it's not just transported, which is a kind of parallel neutral term. It's elevated.
Well, so it feels to me.
Yeah. So you believe, well, let me say, I was going to put it on myself, but let me think of how to frame this neutrally, how to phrase this neutrally. You must believe then, correct me if I'm wrong, that certain types of lives to lead are better than other types.
Yeah.
I think that's unbelievably self-evident to anybody who's ever had any personal difficulties. But yet I see a current in society telling us, the whole Matthew 7:1, judge not lest ye be judged. I see an element in society that rebels against that notion, these historical notions of things that have served us well. Now, you're writing a memoir, correct?
I have written a memoir.
How's it coming? It's finished.
It's done. It's with the publisher.
Oh, it's done. I didn't know that.
And it'll be out in the spring of next year.
Oh, that's a huge deal. How do you feel about it?
I feel great about it, to be honest with you.
Can you tell me about it, or is it a secret?
Well, they've asked me not to. Well, talk too much about it until there's a publication date and there's a publicity plan and all.
Can you tell me your publisher?
It's Norton.
Can you tell me the title?
Yes.
And then I won't push anymore.
It's Late Admissions.
Oh.
Confessions of a Black Conservative.
Oh, wow.
Late admissions.
Wow, very cool. Very cool.
Confessions of a Black Conservative. And it starts with me as a teenager in Chicago and my family, my mother, my father, extended family, my education, my political development this way and that, my professional life.
Well, I don't want you to, if you're publishers, I don't want you to get in trouble if you don't.
Yeah, we
talk
can
about it. So
leave it at that.
but I will pick your brain over dinner if that's okay. Okay. Speaking of admissions, the Supreme Court, very recently, I think today, in fact.
Oh, did the decision come down?
I don't know if it came down. Reed and I have been at lunch, but I think it was supposed to come down. Tell us about race and admissions in the Supreme Court from your knowledge of it.
Well, the court is hearing these cases that have been combined, lawsuits that Students for Fair Admissions, which is a advocacy group on behalf of Asian American aspirants to attend selective colleges and universities in the country, and they're suing Harvard, and they're suing the University of North Carolina. Harvard, a private institution, UNC, Chapel Hill, a public institution, for violation of the Civil Rights Act and of the 14th Amendment in implementing preferential admissions policies favoring Black and Latino applicants to these institutions. And the Asian students are saying, in effect, we're better qualified, but we're not being admitted at a comparable rate to our qualification. And the court is going to hear these cases, or has heard the arguments for these cases, going to render an opinion about them. Now, this is not a new issue. This has been in courts off and on for a half century, ever since the DeFunis case about Washington University Law School's preferential admissions policies, which is 1974, if I'm not mistaken, and the Bakke case about the University of California, Davis medical school admissions policies, which are racially preferential, disadvantaging Alan Bakke, a white aspirant, to go to medical school at UC Davis. And there's a string of cases. I'm not a lawyer, but, I'm vaguely familiar with the evolution of the law on this, most important of which most recently is the 2003 case involving the University of Michigan, in which the court decided that the use of racially preferential admissions policies is acceptable as long as it is narrowly tailored to meet the compelling public interest of racial diversity in higher education. And so that's now under review. That dispensation, Sandra Day O'Connor wrote the controlling opinion in the 2003 case, agreeing that the use of race as one factor amongst many in deciding who to admit to these schools would be okay. Now, the court is more conservative than it was in 2003, and everyone anticipates that it's going to be less favorable in its judgment about racial affirmative action than was the Sandra Day O'Connor opinion. And even in that opinion, she said, okay, we're doing this, and we're going to hold that you can continue to do it under the conditions described, narrowly tailored to meet the compelling interests of diversity, where race is just one factor amongst many, and it's not a quota. But she offered, I should hope in 25 years we wouldn't find it necessary to do so. That was 2003, and that was 20 years ago. So the court is coming back, and we're going to see.
Do you have any thoughts about the way you'd like to see the court go?
Yeah. The essay that I produced for the journal, a magazine that the Manhattan Institute publishes on this question was called Affirmative Distraction. And my position basically is that using lower standards to select African American aspirants for a seat at the table in the most elite educational venues is something that you might have been willing to countenance in 1970 or 1980, transitioning away from the civil rights movement. But it is no way to run a railroad in the 21st century. It's not a set of policies that we want to marry ourselves to in perpetuity. that the jig is up. I say the reason that you're using race is because the African American and Hispanic applicants, on average, have lower qualifications in terms of their academic preparation. That's the problem. The attempt to paper over the objective differences in the mastery that these populations have attained over difficult intellectual work is a distraction from the real task, which is to address their different performances. I say this cannot possibly be healthy either for the institutions as a way of doing business in perpetuity, or even for the populations that are being favored. This is something that people take issue with. And I say that you're going to, as Heather McDonald has emphasized in her recent book, When Race Trumps Merit, you're going to destroy these institutions in the long run by moving away from the objective assessment of the merit of the people who are being enrolled. You're going to water down, you're going to grade inflate, you're going to qualify, you're going to compromise, and you're going to find that excellence becomes harder and harder to pursue. You're letting the tail wag the dog here. I say it's impossible that you could have a standard deviation difference in the mean scores on these aptitude tests of your Black and your white admittees and not have there be measurable differences in their performance after they're admitted. After all, the test scores correlate with the performance of the students within the population groups. That's why you select within the population groups the white applicants or the Asian applicants or the Black applicants who have the best scores. You don't pass over them, given that you have a Black with a lower score, in order to admit the lower scoring person. You know, and I know from decades of experience in higher education that students who are exhibiting exceptional performance on these instruments tend to be more effective in the classroom. So the admissions criteria are correlated with performance. You embed yourself in the system in which you use lower criteria to admit the minority applicants. You're going to get lower performance on average after you have admitted them. How is that equality? There's something that's corrupting and insidious about that practice. And where is it written that in every human pursuit, if African Americans are 12% of the population, that they need to be or would be in an ideal world, exactly 12% of the people who pursue this thing?
Yeah.
So I have staked out this position that affirmative action is an avoidance of the developmental challenge of equipping students to be effective competitors in these. And by the way, the competitions we're talking about are at the upper echelon, the upper 10% or 15% of the institutions. I mean, you're not talking about affirmative action at Kansas State. Affirmative action, they well may practice it, but that's not cutting edge of it. You're talking about MIT, you're talking about Harvard, you're talking about Princeton, you're talking about the University of California, the University of North Carolina, the University of Michigan. So I think that the inheritance from our history of a deficit in the development of intellectual mastery needs to be addressed directly without the expectation that what Ibram X. Kendi calls equity, which is to say a parity of representation would be the consequence, would be the outcome, and that the use of different standards at the upper end of the spectrum of academic achievement, the use of different standards by race, is something that should be avoided. I think that the people who embrace it are either lazy or racist. Those are very strong words. Lazy in the sense that they don't want to face up to the actual challenge, which is how do you educate the youngsters at the earlier stages of their development such that they're competitive, or racist in the sense that they tacitly concede that the Blacks are never going to be able to perform as a population in a comparable way, and therefore they must corrupt the standards of judgment of the institutions of outstanding academic achievement in order to get a demographic result. And I'm against that.
That's awesome. This is like the most analytically thoughtful answer. Okay.
Oh, I've been thinking about it for a while, Peter.
I'm still processing that, Glenn. I'm still processing that. Wow. Okay.
Well, look, people are going to say, they say this about Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, and they're going to say it about me. Well, you benefited from affirmative action. And it's true that when I was a college dropout with 2 children and working a full-time job and going to a community college, when I transferred to Northwestern University as a transfer student, having dropped out of the Illinois Institute of Technology, it's true that Northwestern took me because they were looking for kids that might show some promise from the south side of Chicago to try to respond to the post-1960 imperative of doing the right thing by Black folks. That's certainly true. Now, when I got to Northwestern, I tore the place up. And, when I went from Northwestern to MIT, I was at the top of my class at the most rigorous kind of technical training in economics that you could imagine. So I don't have any apologies to make. But it's true that in 1970, when I transferred from that community college to Northwestern University, I benefited from affirmative action. And they're going to say, well, you benefited from it. Now you want to take it away from other people as well. That's a silly, in my mind, that's a silly argument. It's not 1970. It was 1970, and you were talking about trying to reckon with the consequences of coming out of Jim Crow segregation and whatnot. A state of exception might be entertained in which standards that you would want to adhere to as a matter of baseline governance are suspended on behalf of the historically immediate project of redressing the consequences of history. We're now in the 21st century. You're going to make this a way of life? Yeah. This is your answer to the historical inheritance of racism? Double standards? No. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I was kept thinking about few things that are running through my mind. The idea of what you said in perpetuity, somehow the Supreme Court decision will have lingering consequences. And I was just thinking about the multi-layers of injustice that are embedded in that decision. I'm hesitant to ask you this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you have any predictions about what you think the Supreme Court will decide?
Yeah, I am not a lawyer and I can't parse all of the constitutional interpretation questions, but I think that they're going to come down in the negative on affirmative action. And it's just a question of how severe.
And do you have any predictions as to the consequences if that's the case?
Well, I think there will be resistance. I think this is one of those culture war kind of issues where the bad conservative Republican appointed Trump justices led, Justice Thomas, of course, was not appointed by Donald Trump, but Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch were. And they are the ones who are going to tip the scale in favor, I imagine, what I think the court is going to do, which is basically overturn the precedent of the 2003 decision that I mentioned earlier. And people are going to wail and moan. They're going to say it's turning back the clock. They're going to say that as my friend Randall Kennedy, the distinguished Black law professor at Harvard University, said on the pages of the New York Times recently, everything we try to do to make things more equal to Black people elicits resistance from the white supremacists. Those are not the words, white supremacists, those are my words, but that's the spirit of what he's saying. Establishment. Of course, when they wanted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, there were people who were against it. And when they wanted a Civil Rights Act of 1867 or whatever it was, there were people who were against it and everything in between. So there's going to be that. There's going to be a complaint that this is another instance of a conservative court rolling back the clock. There's going to be resistance on the ground. It's going to be hard to prove that a university that decides that it wants to not any longer use the SAT test as a screen for any applicant. You can submit your test score if you want to, but we don't require it, and we'll vet your application with or without a test score. That's a way of getting around the prohibition on using different test scores cutoffs because you don't use anybody's test score.
Do you think they'll just use zip codes or as a proxy?
That would be one thing that you could do. I actually have a scientific paper that was published in the Journal of Law, Economics, and Organization in 2007, that long ago, written jointly with Roland Fryer, the Harvard economist. We call it colorblind affirmative action. And basically what we argue is, if you just wanted to get the number of Black applicants up, the easiest way, the most efficient way to do that would be to the best scoring Blacks, but use a different cutoff, a lower cutoff. That would be conventional, straightforward, overt affirmative action, lower standard for Blacks, but you're still picking the top students among the Blacks. You just have a lower cutoff. If you tell the institution they can't do that, they're going to look for things that are correlated with race, but are not race themselves, and they're going to use that. What about family composition? If there's not a father in the home, if I give a preference to people who are coming from a single parent family, there'll be whites in that group as well, but disproportionately, there will be more Blacks, relatively speaking, and that'll help Blacks. Zip code, I know that the populations are spatially distributed in a non-random way. I can give the weight to the zip code that happens to have relatively more Black in it. And by using these proxies for race, I can approximate imperfectly the outcome that I would have gotten if I had been able to directly use race. Imperfectly approximated at considerable cost to the institution, because the proxies, as a general matter, have to apply to everybody.
Right.
Not just to the Blacks. And there are just more whites than there are Blacks. And therefore, if I substitute a socioeconomic index instead of the using direct racial information, whatever I sacrifice in terms of the accuracy of my assessment of the student is something I'm going to do for the entire institution, not just for the Black applicants. So I think that we're going to see that. I think we're going to see departments of physics and mathematics and electrical engineering and biochemistry erect internal barriers within the institution to people who will be able to major in their subjects, because the institution will have now given up its responsibility to vet the general pool of applicants and make sure that they pick the ones who are best qualified. And there are going to be a lot of people who are not well qualified to take up these technical subjects, who are going to be asked to pass introductory course with at least a B plus or an A minus or something like that. You know, if you want to do physics, you have to take our intro to physics course and you have to get at least an A minus in it before we allow you to major in physics, which is just another way of assessing the intellectual ability of the people, because they are not going to want to have their classrooms filled with people who can't do calculus in a physics course. But there will be many more of those people around, because the school will have suspended its responsibility to assess the fitness of students coming into the population, the general population of the university, on behalf of their diversity objectives. So I think we're going to see a lot of stuff like that.
What kind of students take your classes?
What do you mean? Do I get Black students? Is that what you're asking?
No, I meant, like, are they conservatives? Are they liberals? Are they...
I'm at Brown. There are virtually no conservatives. They're scarce as hen's teeth.
Huh.
But they are adventurous. They know. I mean, education precedes me. I'm a known quantity. I'm this
We were
heterodox.
canceled from Brown, by the way. Reed and I, we've got
What do you
Brown canceled us. We went on this, it was supposed to be a 10 university college tour where we put lines of tape on the street and do street epistemology, and they canceled us. It was a big hubbubaloo.
What you were doing right there, where you go with the microphone and you say what you think about
I just ask
structured
people,
racism?
or whatever question.
whatever, yeah.
I put them on a line, and then they go from strongly disagree. It's like a Likert scale, strongly disagree.
How could they cancel you? It's a public. These are public
Well,
spaces.
we were invited, and it's a long story. I'll tell you off camera. But we were invited, and they rescinded the invitation, and it just turned into a just crap show. But it was not good. But so the people.
When did this happen?
When did it happen, Reed? Last year?
Oh, recently?
Last summer. Yeah, pretty recently.
Okay. Since John Tomasi has left, You know, John Tomasi, Heterodox Academy.
Yeah, John. Yeah, John's awesome.
Yeah, John's
John's
awesome.
associated with the University of Austin. We had a fantastic time together in Austin.
Ah, great.
Yeah, like fantastic.
Well, before he took over as president of the Heterodox Academy, he was a professor at Brown University of political science. He's a philosopher with political science, libertarian, and a free speech guy.
Yeah, John's a super good guy.
And he was running the Political Theory Project at Brown, which would specialize in having people like Peter Boghossian show up and do whatever it is you do. So it must have been after if it was only a couple of years ago, it was after he left. But I get students, they come to my classes, they appreciate what I'm trying to do. They argue with me. They write papers. At least they used to write papers before Chat GPT came along.
Oh, yeah.
Now I don't know if anybody writes papers
Yeah, that's interesting,
anymore.
Yeah.
I told him you can write your papers with the OpenAI app. And if you do, I'm going to grade them with the OpenAI app.
Fair enough.
You know, input the paper and say, evaluate the
So-
3 main points.
So you know how I used to do that way pre-ChatGPT? So there's this thing, you could get papers from paper mills. And I can't remember. I think I read something in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Some crazy number of people, like, I mean, just something so unbelievable, bought their papers from a paper mill. And so I taught an ethics class, and I said that once. And someone said to me a long time ago, yeah, but that's the poor people. The rich people go to some other site and they get their papers custom written for them by a PhD in India. And it's like, no way.
Yeah.
And you're right. So I went to that site. It was a long time. I went to the site. I'm like, oh my God, that's actually true. So then I switched my whole grading criteria in that one moment. Then it was only in-class exams. Because how could I couldn't give anybody anything to take home.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't control for cheating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think ChatGPT adds another level of complexity to it. Okay, so I want to ask you about the Supreme Court case regarding student loan debt relief. As an economist, what do you think is the best outcome?
I think it's whether or not Biden has the power to unilaterally suspend debt obligations.
Well,
isn't it?
yeah, so I thought that up to a certain amount of money, he was just going to waive all the debt. That was my understanding of it. But
That was like the first 10,000 or something
I was
like that.
thinking
But
10,000. They wanted more. Some of them, the far left, wanted far more. They wanted complete.
the question is, isn't it whether or not that's something that Congress would have to do as opposed to being done by executive order?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Anyway, so since we don't know what the case is
we'll-
about, we should
yeah.
probably not opine about the case.
Yeah, cool.
But if you want to know what I think about student debt relief,
Yeah.
I think it is a transparent pandering to a political electorate by, come feed at the public trough. I think it is. I think
It's
it
so
is.
plain spoken. I love it. That's so true. Yeah.
Who's going to pay for it? There's no
Yeah,
free
yeah.
lunch. That's the first thing they teach you in Economics 101.
Yeah.
Nothing is free. If you get something, it's because somebody else doesn't get something. Somebody pays.
Somewhere.
It comes from, doesn't fall from
Yeah.
the sky. So these debts were incurred. Either the lender is going to eat it,
Yeah.
or somebody else is going to pay the lender for it. Now, who is that person? That's Joe Blow and Jane Blow, average taxpayer. They didn't go to the University of Pennsylvania, probably. They don't have a college degree, probably.
Yeah.
They work hard and they're making 60 grand a year and they're paying their taxes. And that's who's going to pay for somebody to get, who ends up at medical school or whatever. So I think the idea that this is a just or progressive policy, it's a regressive transfer from the general taxpayer to an elite cadre of people who knew fully well what
Yeah.
obligations they were taking on when they took them on. Why not suspend? Why not the mortgage debt? You know, people shouldn't have to pay their mortgage. It's unfair that people have to pay their mortgages.
So let me ask you something I've been wondering about since I have you sitting right here. This is off topic, but I've been thinking about it. So I just heard something I've been thinking about that was just so insane to me, that 1/3 of the total amount of money collected for taxes goes to pay the interest in the national debt. And that just completely blew my mind. Like I simply could not believe that. How much of a problem is that? Is that as big of a problem as I think it is?
Well, the national debt cumulatively, as I understand it, has now exceeded the gross national product. So gross national product is like 22 trillion or something like that a year of GNP. National debt is on the order of magnitude of 25 trillion. So if you're paying interest on that at 6% of 25 trillion, 10% would be 2.5 trillion. So 6% is going to be $1.5 trillion a year.
Good.
30%, so we multiply by 3.3, 1.5 trillion, we're up to about $5 trillion, and the total federal government is probably about $6 trillion. So those numbers seem at least within the ballpark to me.
Okay, so I'm not a math guy, but is it, Glenn, like totally reality check, like, is that a huge, I mean, how is that sustainable? How I mean, unless you're going to posit some way that the GDP rises exponentially. 6% of $25 trillion is 1.5 trillion US dollars. So what am I missing?
You're not missing anything. It's not sustainable. I mean, it means that other things are going to get crowded out of the federal budget. And I mean, how is it sustainable? As long as the lenders are willing to put the money on the table thinking that they're going to get paid back again, you can keep this thing going. But eventually somebody's going to say, this is a house of cards.
Okay. And again, I'm way out of my area, so excuse my ignorance in these questions. Doesn't at least some of that assume that the dollar is the world's currency reserve?
Well, the 6% interest that I hypothesize, which might be less or more, I don't know what the actual interest rate is lower than it otherwise would be if the dollar were not the world's reserve currency. So maybe the cost of carrying the debt would go up if the dollar lost its primacy. But this is not an area, international finance, that I have any special expertise in.
I don't know about it, but so I've been thinking about it, and I throw you a real curveball here. So I scroll Twitter every night. It's a terrible habit, but I was looking at pictures of RFK, of Kennedy, that the internet has exploded about. I don't know if you saw.
Oh, Junior?
Yeah, he's like buffed, and he's like, he's at Muscle Beach, Venice, or something.
No, I haven't seen these photos.
So, but I just could not believe, like, all these people are texting about it. Is he on growth hormones? I mean, I personally couldn't possibly.
What's the point?
Well, I don't know. That's exactly what's the point. It's like, I've often thought that we are preoccupied with the wrong things. Like, we're caring about the wrong things. And so, I don't know. Maybe it's easier to care about whether or not Kennedy's taking bovine growth hormone than it is. It's simpler. I'm worried about inflation. So I'm at this point at 56. I'll be 57 next month. I am way beyond the point of concern at this point in my life. I'm like actually into the realm of worry now. Like, I just moved out of Portland, and the homeless epidemic was terrible. The fentanyl epidemic was terrible. The tent camping, the violence, the I don't know. It just seems to me that 1/3 of the interest in the national debt, the tax cut, I mean, that was just something so utterly mind-blowing about that to me that I've never, like, you would think that would be like this whole alien things I spoke to Michael Schellenberger about. Like, you would think that everybody would be talking about, the debt, inflation rates. I go out to dinner, I'm amazed. I was in Hungary. I came back from Hungary and I saw a $12 cocktail. I'm like, holy moly, $12 cocktail? It's insane. Now we're here, it's like cocktails are $17. So it's good because I shouldn't be drinking anyway. But it's bad for my health, and it's certainly bad for my sleep. Glenn, thank you very much for talking to me today. I sincerely appreciate it. How can people find you? Where can they reach you?
Well, I'm at glennloury.substack.com, and I'm at YouTube/C/Glenn Loury Show.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I really respect your work.
Thank you very much, Peter. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for watching. Everything we do is under the umbrella of the National Progress Alliance, nationalprogressalliance.org. It's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. Your generous donations keep us going and keep fueling content like this. So please help us out. Make a donation. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.